Your phone buzzes, you glance down and read 4 words. We need to talk. No context, no explanation, just that. And within seconds, before you've taken a breath, before you've formed a single conscious thought, your mind is already somewhere else entirely, running through possibilities, constructing scenarios, a problem at work, something you said last week, a relationship about to end, a piece of news someone has been holding back. Each possibility arrives faster than the last, and each one is worse than the one before it. Nothing has happened. The message contains no information beyond the fact that a conversation is coming, and yet your body has already responded. A tightening in the chest, a slight quickening of the pulse, a restlessness that has no specific object because the threat itself has no specific shape, just the outline of one, just the possibility. This happens in ordinary moments too, not only the obvious ones. A family member doesn't answer the phone and you call twice more before consciously deciding to. Your doctor's office leaves a voicemail asking you to call back, and the hours before you reach them feel strangely heavy. Your boss mentions almost in passing that she'd like to meet tomorrow, and for the rest of the afternoon, some part of your attention never fully returns to what you were doing. In every one of these moments, the facts are essentially neutral. No one has told you anything is wrong. The evidence, if you were to look at it honestly, points toward nothing in particular. And yet something inside you has already decided that the most dangerous interpretation deserves the most attention. And it made that decision before you had any say in it. Most people, when they notice this happening, reach for a familiar explanation. I'm an anxious person. I always assume the worst. I need to think more positively. The problem in this framing is a habit of mind, something to be corrected, managed, or overcome through effort and discipline. But what if the catastrophic thought didn't begin in your mind at all? What if it began somewhere older, somewhere deeper, somewhere that was never waiting for your permission in the first place? If nothing bad has actually happened yet, why does your brain already act as if disaster is on its way? In the last episode, we explored something that most people carry for years without understanding. Why painful memories last so much longer than pleasant ones. Why the brain stores danger with unusual durability, returning to it long after the original experience has passed. But there's something even stranger than remembering past danger. Something that, once you notice it, seems almost illogical. The brain doesn't only hold on to threats from the past, it reaches forward and constructs them in the future, in situations where nothing dangerous has happened yet and may never happen at all. This is catastrophic thinking, not in the clinical sense, not as a diagnosis, but as a description of something the human mind does automatically, reflexively, and almost universally. Given a gap in information, given an unresolved question, given any situation where the outcome is genuinely uncertain, the brain doesn't stay neutral. It doesn't generate a balanced range of possibilities and wait patiently to see which one arrives. It gravitates toward the worst one. It begins simulating that outcome in unusual detail, and it treats the simulation as if it were far more probable than the evidence suggests. Psychologists call the specific mechanism future threat simulation, the brain's tendency to model dangerous outcomes as a way of preparing for them in advance. And the more uncertain the situation, the more intensely this simulation runs. Not because the person running it is pessimistic or fragile, but because the simulation itself is serving a purpose. One that has nothing to do with accuracy or balance and everything to do with something far more ancient. What's remarkable when you look at the research is how consistent this is across people. Catastrophic thinking isn't a feature of anxious personalities. It appears across cultures, across temperaments, across life circumstances. The intensity varies. The specific content changes, but the underlying pull toward the worst possible outcome, that part is remarkably stable across the human population, which raises a question that no amount of positive thinking has ever fully answered. If catastrophizing were simply a bad habit, an error in reasoning, a failure of perspective, why would it be so universal? Why would a brain capable of extraordinary precision and creativity consistently default to this particular pattern, unless it isn't a failure at all? Imagine a security guard stationed alone in a large building overnight. His job is to keep the building safe. Most nights, nothing happens. A door creaks in the wind, a sensor trips because of a moth near the light, a shadow moves that turns out to be nothing, and every single time, he investigates anyway. From the outside, this looks inefficient. The vast majority of his responses lead nowhere. Most alarms are false. But here's the calculation his training has built into him. The cost of investigating a false alarm is a few wasted minutes. The cost of ignoring a real one could be catastrophic. So, he investigates everything, not because he's irrational, but because the asymmetry of consequences makes caution the only logical position. Your brain's threat detection system runs on exactly this logic, and it has been running it far longer than any security protocol ever written. We've already met the amygdala in previous episodes, the brain's emotional priority system, flagging experiences that carry survival significance. The amygdala doesn't only respond to threats that are present and immediate, it responds to threats that are possible and anticipated, and it does so by working in close, sometimes tense collaboration with the prefrontal cortex, the brain's center for planning, reasoning, and future projection. Under calm conditions, the prefrontal cortex acts as a moderating influence, evaluating the amygdala's threat signals, contextualizing them, adjusting their intensity based on available evidence. But under conditions of uncertainty, that balance shifts. When the prefrontal cortex cannot resolve the uncertainty, when it genuinely doesn't know what's coming, it loses some of its ability to moderate. The amygdala signals amplify, and the brain begins running simulations, not because it knows something bad is coming, but because it can't confirm that something bad isn't. This is intolerance of uncertainty operating at the neurological level in the context of chronic worry and visible here in its forward-facing form. The nervous system cannot remain neutral in the presence of an unresolved threat. It must resolve the uncertainty somehow, and in the absence of real information, it resolves it by generating the most dangerous plausible scenario and preparing for that. Evolution preferred this strategy overwhelmingly. Across millions of years, the brains that survived were not the balanced ones, not the optimistic ones, not the ones that waited for evidence before responding. They were the ones that generated thousands of false alarms rather than miss a single real threat. Here is what catastrophizing actually is. Underneath all the explanations and analogies and evolutionary context, it is your brain trying to feel certain in a situation where certainty isn't available. Not pessimism, not weakness, not a failure of perspective or discipline, an attempt, automatic, ancient, running below conscious awareness, to resolve the one condition their nervous system finds most intolerable, not knowing what comes next. Uncertainty to the threat detection system does not feel neutral. It feels like exposure. It feels like standing in unfamiliar terrain without knowing what's in the shadows. And the brain's response to that feeling is not to wait patiently for more information. It is to generate a prediction, the most dangerous plausible prediction, and begin preparing for it immediately. Because a brain that prepares for the worst and finds nothing is merely relieved. A brain that stays calm and finds danger may not survive to recalibrate. For hundreds of thousands of years, this was not an overreaction. It was the correct response. The ancestors who heard an unusual sound in the dark and imagined the most dangerous explanation were the ones who moved, who prepared, who survived to pass on their biology. The ones who waited for evidence, who reasoned that unusual sounds are usually nothing, were occasionally right and occasionally wrong in ways that couldn't be corrected afterward. Your catastrophic thoughts are the inheritance of every ancestor who survived by assuming the worst. Pause. Your brain is not trying to make you anxious, it is trying to make you ready. The problem is not the mechanism. The mechanism is extraordinary. A survival forecasting system of remarkable sophistication, refined across more generations than recorded history can contain. The problem is the context it's now operating in. A "we need to talk" message is not a predator. An unreturned phone call is not evidence of disaster. A meeting request from a manager is not a threat to survival, but the system evaluating these situations was never updated to reflect that. It is still running the original calculation. Uncertain outcome plus possible danger equals prepare for the worst immediately. The catastrophic scenario your brain generates isn't a prediction of what will happen. It is a preparation for what, in a different world and a different time, survival required you to be ready for. That distinction, Between a prediction and a preparation changes everything about what these thoughts actually mean. There's a particular kind of relief that comes not from solving a problem but from finally understanding it. Not the relief of resolution, of knowing that everything will be fine, that the "we need to talk" message leads somewhere harmless, that the doctor's call is routine. That kind of relief depends on outcomes, and outcomes aren't always in your control. This is something quieter, the relief of recognition, of seeing a pattern that has shaped your inner life for years and finally being able to name what it actually is. Your brain expects the worst not because you are broken, not because you are weak, not because you have failed to develop the mental discipline that other people apparently possess. It expects the worst because you are the descendant of every human being who survived long enough to reproduce. And survival for most of that history belonged disproportionately to the brains that took uncertainty seriously. You inherited a forecasting system calibrated for a world of genuine, recurring physical danger. That system now operates in a world where most uncertainty is social, professional, relational, and where the worst case, even when it does arrive, is rarely the kind of threat the system was designed to handle. The gap between the system's calibration and your actual circumstances is where catastrophizing lives. Not in a flaw of character, not in a deficit of optimism. In the distance between an ancient brain and a modern world that hasn't yet given it sufficient reason to update its default settings. And here is the quietly surprising part. The part that neuroscience has only recently begun to articulate clearly. The catastrophic prediction your brain generates is not a fact, it is a forecast. And forecasts, unlike facts, are subject to revision. Not through positive thinking, not through arguing with the thought, not through any act of willpower directed at the prediction itself, but through something more gradual, more fundamental, through the accumulation of new evidence that the nervous system eventually learns to trust. You don't need to know how that works yet. Simply understanding that the prediction is a prediction, not a truth, not an inevitability, not a signal that disaster is actually coming, is itself a shift in the relationship between you and the thought, which leaves one question still open. If your brain has spent years learning to forecast danger automatically, practicing that forecast until it runs faster and more convincingly than any alternative, can it unlearn it? Can a nervous system that has rehearsed catastrophe so thoroughly actually rehearse something different instead?